There is something about Keanu Reeves that makes you stop and think about what it truly means to be a good person. In a world filled with noise and ego and endless competition, he moves quietly through life like a gentle river. He does not chase attention. He does not demand recognition. He simply exists with kindness as his compass and humility as his guide. I have watched interviews where he speaks about loss, about grief, about the people he loved and lost too soon. And instead of becoming bitter, instead of closing his heart to the world, he chose to remain soft. He chose to keep giving. That is what inspires me about him. Not his fame, not his movies, but the simple truth that he proves every single day. You can be successful and still be kind. You can be powerful and still be gentle. You can carry pain in your heart and still offer love to strangers. That is the spirit behind this story. And I believe by the end, you will understand why some moments change everything, and why some people remind us who we truly want to be. The air inside the old Paramount Theater felt different that afternoon. It was not something anyone could see or name, but it was there, sitting quietly between the dusty velvet seats and the golden light falling through the tall windows. Alexandra Grant stood near the edge of the stage, and for a moment she did not move. Her hands rested gently against her sides, and her breath came slow and uncertain, as if her body sensed something her mind had not yet understood. The silence around her was not empty. It was waiting, and somewhere deep inside her chest, a feeling stirred, soft and unnamed, like a memory trying to wake from a long sleep. She had been invited to participate in a charity performance unlike any other. For one night only, some of Hollywood's most respected artists would gather on this very stage to perform dramatic readings for the Children's Grief Foundation. Every seat in the theater had been sold for $10,000. The cause was close to Alexandra's heart. She was not an actress. She was a painter, a woman whose silver hair and warm eyes had graced galleries around the world. But when the foundation asked her to be part of this event, she could not say no. Grief was something she understood. Loss was a language she had learned long ago. She looked around the theater, taking in its faded beauty. The crimson curtains hung heavy with decades of dust and memory. The chandelier above the stage sparkled faintly, catching the last of the afternoon sun. Everything about this place felt old and sacred, like a church for forgotten dreams. Alexandra wondered how many stories had been told on this stage, how many tears had been shed, how many hearts had been broken and healed within these walls. Then she heard footsteps. They were calm and steady, echoing softly from the shadows near the back of the stage. A figure emerged, tall and dressed simply in black, with a presence that needed no introduction. Keanu Reeves walked toward her with the kind of quiet grace that could not be taught. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, met hers without hesitation. "You must be Alexandra," he said gently. His voice was low and warm, like a fire on a cold night. She nodded, suddenly aware of how still the air had become between them. They had crossed paths before at galleries and events, exchanged polite words and brief smiles. But here, in this intimate theater, something felt different. There was no crowd to perform for, no cameras to smile at, just two people standing on an empty stage about to share something real. Keanu handed her a script. "They paired us together for scene 7, he said, the grief monologue. Alexandra opened the pages slowly. Her eyes moved across the words, and with each line her heart grew heavier. The scene was intense. A husband and wife confronting the loss of their child, their marriage cracking under the weight of unspoken sorrow, their love struggling to survive in the shadow of grief. "Heavy material," she whispered. Keanu nodded, "the heaviest." For a brief moment, a shadow passed across his face. It was quick, almost invisible, but Alexandra caught it. She knew fragments of his story. Everyone did. The losses he had carried, the grief he had never fully escaped. But seeing that flicker of pain in his eyes made her realize something important. This was not just acting for him. This was memory. This was truth. Before she could speak, a sharp voice echoed through the theater. "All right, everyone, full rehearsal in 30 minutes. I want perfection." The voice belonged to Martin Cross, the director. He sat in the front row, his arms folded, his expression tight with impatience. Martin was known for his brilliance and his cruelty in equal measure. He had won awards for his work, but he had also broken spirits along the way. Kindness was not part of his vocabulary. "This audience is paying $10,000 a seat," Martin continued. "We owe them tears, real tears, not amateur nonsense." Alexandra felt a chill run through her. She had dealt with difficult people before, but something about Martin made her uneasy. There was a coldness in him that went beyond professionalism. It was personal. It was sharp. She turned her attention away from him and let her eyes wander across the stage. That was when she noticed her. A young woman, barely 22 years old, adjusting cables near the right wing. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were red from crying. She moved like someone trying desperately to be invisible. "Who is that?" Alexandra whispered to Keanu. He followed her gaze. "Emma, she is the lighting assistant, volunteered for the event." Alexandra watched the girl for a long moment. There was something broken in the way she held herself, something fragile and heavy at the same time. "She looks lost," Alexandra said softly. Keanu was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, and his words carried a weight that surprised her. "Grief has a face," he said quietly. "I recognize it." Before Alexandra could respond, Martin's voice boomed again. Scene 7, Grant, Reeves, center stage, now. The rehearsal was about to begin, but Alexandra could not shake the image of that young woman from her mind. Something was happening in this theater that went beyond scripts and performances. Something was unfolding beneath the surface, and she had a feeling that before this night was over, everything would change. The spotlight felt heavier than Alexandra had expected. It was not just light falling upon her shoulders. It was expectation. It was pressure. It was the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions waiting to be released. She stood at center stage, script in hand, her heart beating in a rhythm that felt unfamiliar. Across from her, Keanu waited with a stillness that seemed almost impossible. His eyes were focused, but there was something deeper behind them, a quiet understanding. A readiness to go wherever the scene demanded. And in that moment, Alexandra realized that this rehearsal was going to ask more of her than she had prepared to give. Martin Cross sat in the front row, his pen tapping impatiently against his notebook. His presence was suffocating, even from a distance. Every few seconds, he would sigh loudly or shake his head, making sure everyone knew he was watching and judging. The other actors moved carefully around him, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to breathe too loudly. The atmosphere in the theater had shifted from sacred to tense, and Alexandra could feel it pressing against her chest. Scene 7, Martin announced coldly, "From the beginning, and make it real this time." Alexandra took a deep breath. She looked down at the script, then back at Keanu. He gave her a small nod, almost invisible, but it was enough. It told her that he was with her, that they were in this together. The scene began. "You never talk about him." Alexandra delivered her line, her voice trembling with emotion she did not have to fake. "It is like he never existed." Keanu turned his back to her, his shoulders tight with grief. "Maybe that is easier," he responded. "Maybe pretending is the only way I survive." The words hung in the air between them. They were not just lines anymore. They were truths wrapped in fiction. Alexandra could feel tears forming in her eyes, and she let them come. She let herself sink into the pain of the scene, into the broken heart of a mother who had lost everything. The crew watched in silence. Even Martin stopped scribbling notes. For a few precious minutes, no one moved, no one breathed. The performance was raw and honest and painfully beautiful. But Alexandra could not fully focus. From the corner of her eye, she kept seeing Emma. The young lighting assistant stood near the control panel, her hands trembling as she adjusted the switches. Every time certain words were spoken, Emma flinched. Words like loss, words like gone, words like never coming back. It was as if the script was reaching into her chest and pulling out wounds that had not yet healed. Alexandra finished her final line, and Martin clapped his hands once. "Better," he said, though his tone carried no warmth. "Take 15 minutes, then we run it again." The cast scattered, some heading toward the refreshment table, others stepping outside for air. But Alexandra did not move toward either. Instead, she walked quietly toward the back of the stage, where Emma was pretending to organize cables that were already perfectly arranged. "Hey," Alexandra said softly, stopping a few feet away. "I am Alexandra." Emma looked up, startled. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she quickly wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I know who you are," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your paintings. I have seen them. The ones about light finding its way through darkness." Alexandra felt her heart tighten. "You understand them." It was not a question. It was a recognition. And in that moment, Emma's face crumpled. She tried to hold it together, tried to keep the walls standing, but they were already falling. "My mom," Emma whispered. "She passed 6 weeks ago, cancer." The words landed like stones in still water. Alexandra reached out and gently took Emma's hands in hers. They were cold and trembling, like the hands of a child lost in a storm. "Oh, sweetheart," Alexandra said softly, I am so sorry. Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I volunteered for this event because the foundation helped us, helped her. I wanted to give back, I wanted to do something good, but hearing these scenes, these words, it is like reliving it, every single word. Alexandra squeezed her hands gently. Why did you not tell someone? Why did you not ask for help? Emma looked down at the floor, because I wanted to be strong. Mom would have wanted me to be strong. She always said that crying was just wasting time. She said you have to keep moving, keep pushing, keep going. Alexandra felt a wave of compassion wash over her. She thought about all the times she had told herself the same thing, all the moments she had swallowed her pain and kept walking, and she realized how much damage that kind of thinking could cause. Strength is not silence, Alexandra said gently. Strength is showing up even when you are breaking. Strength is letting people see your cracks and trusting them to hold you anyway. Your mother loved you. I know she did. But sometimes the people who love us teach us the wrong lessons, not because they mean to, but because they are fighting their own battles. Emma looked up, her eyes searching Alexandra's face for something to hold on to. You really believe that? I do, Alexandra replied, and I think somewhere deep inside you believe it too. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the theater faded into the background, and all that remained was this quiet connection between two strangers who understood each other's pain. Then Alexandra felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly and found Keanu standing a few feet away. He had been watching, he had heard everything, and his eyes, those deep and thoughtful eyes, held no judgment, only compassion. He stepped forward and spoke quietly to Emma. What was her name, your mother? Emma blinked, surprised by the question. Grace, she whispered. Her name was Grace. Keanu nodded slowly, as if the name meant something sacred. Tell me about her, he said. What did she love? What made her laugh? Emma opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a sharp voice cut through the moment like a knife. Everyone back to positions. Now, we do not have time for social hour. It was Martin, and he was looking directly at them with impatience burning in his eyes. The moment shattered. Emma stepped back, her walls rising again. Alexandra felt a surge of frustration rise in her chest. Something important had been happening, something real, and Martin had destroyed it without a second thought. But Keanu did not move. He stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Martin, and in that stillness Alexandra sensed something shifting. A decision being made, a line being drawn. Whatever was coming next, she knew it would change everything. The silence that followed Martin's command was not the kind that came from obedience. It was the kind that came from tension, from a room full of people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Alexandra could feel it in the air around her, thick and heavy like the moments before a storm breaks. Keanu had not moved from his place near Emma. His eyes remained fixed on Martin, calm but unwavering. There was no anger in his expression, no challenge. Just a quiet refusal to pretend that nothing important was happening. Martin's face tightened with irritation. He was not used to being ignored. In his world, his word was law, and everyone moved when he commanded. The fact that Keanu remained still, that Alexandra remained by Emma's side, seemed to wound something deep in his ego. I said positions, Martin repeated, his voice rising. We have less than 36 hours until the performance. Every minute wasted is money lost. Do I need to remind you how much is at stake here? No one answered. The crew members looked at the floor. The other actors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of Martin's authority pressed down on everyone, and most of them had learned long ago that resistance was not worth the cost. But Keanu was not most people. He turned slowly to Emma, and his voice was gentle when he spoke. We will talk more later, he said quietly. I promise. Emma nodded, her eyes still wet with tears. She stepped back toward the lighting controls, her hands trembling as she tried to focus on her work. Alexandra watched her go, feeling a deep ache in her chest. There was so much pain in that young woman, so much grief that had nowhere to go. Alexandra and Keanu walked back to center stage together. Martin watched them with narrowed eyes, his pen tapping against his notebook in an aggressive rhythm. He did not say anything more, but his displeasure filled the room like smoke. Scene 7, Martin announced, from the top, and this time try to remember that you are professionals. The rehearsal resumed. Alexandra delivered her lines with everything she had, pouring her heart into every word. Keanu matched her perfectly, his performance raw and honest and deeply moving. For a few minutes, the tension in the room seemed to ease. The scene was working. The emotion was real. But then the lights flickered. It was a small thing at first, just a brief stutter in the spotlight. But Martin noticed immediately, and his reaction was instant and brutal. "What is happening with the lights?" he shouted, throwing his script against the stage floor. The pages scattered like frightened birds. "This is a professional production. I demand professional work. Whoever is responsible for this disaster needs to fix it immediately or get out of my theater." All eyes turned to the lighting panel. Emma stood frozen, her hands gripping the controls, her face pale with fear. She had made a mistake, just one small mistake. But in Martin's world, small mistakes were unforgivable sins. "I am sorry," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am so sorry. It will not happen again." Martin stood up from his seat and walked toward the stage, his footsteps echoing like thunder. "You are sorry," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Sorry does not fix the problem. Sorry does not bring back the money we will lose if this performance fails. Sorry is the excuse of people who do not belong here." Alexandra stepped forward. "Martin, she is doing her best. She is a volunteer. She came here to help." "Then she should help by being competent," Martin snapped. His eyes locked onto Emma, and there was cruelty in his gaze that made Alexandra's blood run cold. "You are done. Pack your things and leave. I will not have amateurs ruining my production." Emma's face crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she began to step back, to retreat into the shadows where she could fall apart in private. Alexandra wanted to reach out, wanted to stop her, but the words caught in her throat. Then Keanu spoke. "No." It was a single word, spoken quietly, but it carried the force of 100 shouts. The entire theater went silent. Martin turned to face Keanu, disbelief written across his features. "Excuse me," Martin said, his voice dangerous. Keanu walked to center stage. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. He did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. He simply stood there, solid and immovable, like a mountain refusing to bow to the wind. "We are not doing this scene yet," Keanu said calmly. Martin's face turned red with fury. "You do not get to make that decision. I am the director. I am in charge of this production, and I say we continue." Keanu shook his head slowly. "Then we use the time wisely, because there is something more important happening here than our rehearsal schedule." "More important?" Martin sputtered. "What could possibly be more important than preparing for a $10 million charity event?" Keanu turned and looked at Emma, who stood trembling near the back curtain, ready to disappear forever. He raised his hand and pointed toward her. "Her," he said simply, "she is more important." The theater fell into stunned silence. No one moved, no one breathed. Even Martin seemed momentarily frozen by the unexpected response. Keanu continued, his voice steady and clear. "The Children's Grief Foundation exists because of people like her, people who have lost someone they love, people who are trying to find a way forward through the darkness. We are here to raise money for that cause. We are here to honor grief and healing and hope. And you want to throw her out because she is grieving, because her hands are shaking, because she made one small mistake while carrying a weight that most of us cannot imagine." Martin opened his mouth to respond, but Keanu did not give him the chance. "I have seen grief destroy people," Keanu said, and for the first time his voice carried a tremor of emotion. "I have felt it myself, and I know that the only thing that saves us is kindness. The only thing that heals us is being seen and held and told that we matter. If we cannot offer that to one young woman standing right in front of us, then everything we are doing here is meaningless." Alexandra felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Keanu, and in that moment she understood why he had touched so many lives. It was not his talent, it was not his fame, it was his heart. Keanu turned to Emma and extended his hand toward her. "Come here," he said gently. Emma stared at him, frozen with fear and hope and disbelief. And the entire theater waited to see what would happen next. Emma did not move at first. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, heavy with fear and uncertainty. Every eye in the theater was fixed upon her, and she could feel the weight of their attention pressing against her chest like a stone. She had spent 6 weeks trying to be invisible, 6 weeks swallowing her tears and pushing through her pain and pretending that she was fine. And now, suddenly, she was standing in a spotlight she had never asked for, being seen by people who were strangers to her grief. Keanu's hand remained extended toward her. He did not rush her. He did not speak again. He simply waited with a patience that seemed impossible in a room so filled with tension. His eyes held no judgment, no expectation, only a quiet invitation. And somewhere deep inside Emma, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was safe to step forward. She looked at Alexandra, who stood beside Keanu with tears glistening on her cheeks. Alexandra nodded gently, and her lips formed words that Emma could barely hear but somehow understood completely. "It is okay, you are not alone." Martin shifted impatiently in his seat. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We do not have time for group therapy. We have a performance to prepare." Keanu did not acknowledge him. He kept his focus entirely on Emma, as if Martin's words were nothing more than wind passing through the room. And in that moment, Emma made a choice. She did not know if it was courage or exhaustion or simply the desperate need to be seen by someone who understood, but she stepped forward. Her legs trembled as she walked toward center stage. The distance was not far, perhaps 20 feet, but it felt like crossing an ocean. With each step, she could feel herself shedding the armor she had built around her heart. By the time she reached Keanu, she was shaking so hard she thought she might collapse. Keanu took her hand gently and led her to the center of the stage. The spotlight fell upon them both, warm and golden, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. Alexandra moved to stand beside them, creating a small circle of protection in the middle of the vast theater. Martin threw his arms up in frustration. "This is absolutely ridiculous. We have schedules to keep. We have donors expecting perfection. I will not let some amateur volunteer derail everything we have worked for." Alexandra turned to face him, and her voice was sharper than Emma had ever heard it. "Martin, sit down." Something in her tone made him pause. Perhaps it was the authority she carried as an artist who had earned respect through decades of work. Perhaps it was the way she stood so firmly, so unyielding, like a woman who would not be moved. Whatever it was, Martin sat down. Keanu guided Emma to the floor of the stage and sat down beside her, crossing his legs like they had all the time in the world. Alexandra joined them, and slowly, one by one, the cast and crew began to gather. They sat on the stage, leaned against the walls, formed a circle around this young woman who had been invisible just moments before. The theater that had felt so cold and intimidating now began to feel like something else entirely. A sanctuary, a place where broken things could be held without shame. Keanu looked at Emma with gentle eyes. "Tell us about her," he said softly. "Your mom, what was she like?" Emma felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them this time. For the first time in 6 weeks, she let herself feel everything she had been running from. Her name was Grace, Emma whispered, and she really was graceful, not in the way dancers are, but in the way she moved through life. Like every moment was precious, like every person mattered. Alexandra reached out and took Emma's hand. What did she love? Emma closed her eyes, and for a moment she was back home. Back in the kitchen with her mother, sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of coffee and fresh flowers filling the air. She loved sunflowers, Emma said, a small smile breaking through her tears. She said they always turned toward the light, even on the darkest days. She kept them everywhere, on the kitchen table, on the windowsills, even in the bathroom. She said they reminded her that hope was always possible. Someone in the circle let out a soft sob. Emma looked around and saw that she was not the only one crying. The tears were flowing freely now, from actors and stagehands and musicians alike. Grief was a language they all understood. "She used to sing every morning," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "Here Comes the Sun," even when she was sick, even when she could barely breathe. She would hum it under her breath and smile at me like everything was going to be okay. Keanu nodded slowly. "She sounds like someone extraordinary." "She was," Emma whispered. "She really was." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was full. It was alive with something sacred, something that could not be named but could only be felt. Then Martin stood up. Emma's heart froze. She braced herself for another cruel remark, another dismissal, another reminder that her grief was an inconvenience. But when she looked at Martin's face, she saw something she had not expected. His eyes were wet. He stood at the edge of the circle, his arms hanging limply at his sides, his usual arrogance stripped away. He looked smaller somehow, more human, more broken than she had realized. "My daughter," Martin said, his voice barely above a whisper. She passed 3 years ago, leukemia, she was only 15. The theater went completely silent. Martin's hands trembled as he spoke. I buried myself in work because I did not know how else to survive. I became hard because being soft hurt too much. I pushed everyone away because letting people in meant risking more loss. He looked at Emma, and for the first time there was no coldness in his gaze, only recognition. I am sorry, he said, for how I treated you. I saw your pain and it reminded me of my own, and instead of reaching out, I pushed you away. Emma stared at him, unable to speak. She had expected cruelty, she had expected dismissal, she had not expected this. Keanu rose to his feet and walked toward Martin. He did not say anything. He simply placed a hand on the older man's shoulder and stood with him in silence. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. Something that had been broken for a very long time began to heal. But they were not finished yet. The performance was still coming, and what happened next would change all of them forever. The next morning, the theater was still, almost sacred in its silence. A soft golden light filtered through the tall windows, lighting the dust floating gently in the air. It felt like the building itself had taken a breath, like it had listened to everything that had been said the night before and now waited for what would come next. Alexandra stood on stage alone, staring out at the empty rows of red velvet seats. Her fingers were wrapped around a warm cup of tea, and her thoughts were with Emma. She had not slept much, not because of stress, but because of everything swirling in her heart. Something had opened inside her last night, something real. She had come here prepared to perform a script, to share a few emotional lines on stage and go home. But what happened instead was life, raw and unscripted, messy and beautiful, and now she could not go back to pretending. They all had to do something more. Behind her, soft footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. She turned and found Keanu walking in, his face calm but eyes full of thought. There was something about the way he moved now, more grounded, more present, different from the rehearsals before. He looked at her and smiled, a quiet smile that needed no words. "Morning," Alexandra said softly. "Morning," he replied. They stood beside each other in silence, sipping warm drinks, watching the soft light stretch across the seats. For a few moments it was enough. "She told me more about her mom," Alexandra said after a while. "Emma, last night after everyone left." Keanu looked at her, listening. "She showed me a drawing," Alexandra continued, her voice gentle. It was a sunflower, simple, sketched in pencil on the edge of a wrinkled notebook page, but there was so much love in it, so much light. Keanu nodded slowly. "I want to change the ending of Scene 7, Alexandra said. "I want it to carry hope, not just pain. It should reflect what we've learned, what we've lived through, not just the grief, but the healing too." Keanu paused and let the words settle. "Then let's rewrite it," he said. The rehearsal later that day was unlike any the cast or crew had ever experienced. Martin, still quieter than usual, sat in the front row, his notebook closed, his hands resting in his lap. He watched, not with sharp judgment, but with something softer. He looked tired but honest, real, human. Alexandra stood center stage, the new script in hand. This time, Scene 7 was different. It began the same way, with pain and silence, with the characters speaking through tears that went deeper than performance. But halfway through, something shifted. "Maybe the grief doesn't go away," Alexandra said in character, her voice shaking. "Maybe it stays. Maybe it becomes part of who we are." "Then we don't have to fight it anymore," Keanu responded as her scene partner. "Maybe we just carry it with us, like a scar, like a reminder that we loved deeply, that we still do." And then the stage lights turned warm, deep gold, the color of sunflowers. Emma, standing in the light booth, had added the final element. A voiceover played softly as the actors paused. It was Emma's voice. "Dear Mom," she said gently, "I thought I had to be strong by hiding. I thought moving on meant letting go. But I was wrong. You are not gone. You are in every sunflower, in every warm morning, in every act of kindness that feels like a breath of grace. I will not forget you, and I will not hide anymore." The scene ended not with anguish, but with stillness, not with despair, but with peace. And when the tech crew brought the lights slowly back up, there was silence in the room, followed by quiet tears from nearly everyone watching. Martin stood, slowly and uncertainly. He walked to the edge of the stage where Alexandra and Keanu stood, and for a moment he just looked at them. "You were right," he said. "This is better than perfect. This is honest." Keanu stepped toward him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for listening." Martin nodded. And for the first time since the performance process began, he looked at Emma in the booth and gave her a small, respectful nod. "Thank you," he said. Emma's eyes widened, not from fear this time, but surprise, quiet respect. That evening, Alexandra stayed late to paint. She had brought her brushes and blank canvas to the stage after rehearsal, setting up in the wings as the crew slowly packed up. Her strokes were slow, thoughtful. She had chosen only yellows and soft oranges, light and warmth and healing. Behind her, soft footsteps approached again. "You are still here," Keanu said. Alexandra did not look up right away. "This is for her," she said softly, "for Grace, and for Emma, and for anyone who has ever held grief in their chest like fire and waited for it to stop burning." Keanu stepped closer, watching the painting form. "Can I help?" he asked. Alexandra paused, then handed him a brush. "Yes," she whispered, "I think you already are." They painted in silence together, colors blending. On the stage that had once felt filled with pressure and harsh direction, there was now peace and purpose. Where there had once been fear, there was now connection. Something had changed. Not just in the script or the lights, not just in Martin or Emma or Alexandra. Something had changed in all of them. And still, the night of the performance was ahead. The audience, the final test, the moment when everything they had lived, felt, and created would be shared with the world. Keanu set his brush down and looked at the painting. "She will be proud," he said. Alexandra smiled softly. "I hope so." Somewhere not far above them, the chandelier caught the moonlight. A golden glow filled the theater one more time. Tomorrow they would take the stage. And nothing would be the same again. The night of the performance arrived like a quiet miracle. Outside the Paramount Theater, limousines lined the street, their headlights glowing softly in the evening mist. Men and women in elegant gowns and tailored suits walked through the grand entrance, their footsteps echoing across marble floors that had witnessed decades of stories. Every seat in the theater had been sold, $10,000 each, and yet none of them knew what was truly waiting for them inside. They had come expecting a show. They would leave with something far more precious. Backstage, the energy was different from any production Alexandra had ever been part of. There was no panic, no sharp commands, no tension crackling through the air. Instead, there was stillness. There was purpose. The cast moved quietly, preparing themselves not just as performers, but as vessels for something sacred. Tonight was not about applause. Tonight was about truth. Alexandra stood in front of a small mirror, adjusting her simple black dress. Her silver hair was pinned back softly and her hands were steady. She was not nervous. She was ready. Keanu appeared beside her, dressed in a dark suit that fit him perfectly. He looked at her reflection in the mirror and smiled gently. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Alexandra turned to face him. "Like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Keanu nodded. "Me too." Across the room, Emma sat alone on a wooden crate, her headset resting around her neck. She would be running the lights tonight, the most important role she had ever played. Her hands were not shaking anymore. Her eyes were clear. Something had shifted inside her over the past 2 days. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer controlled her. It had become part of her story instead of the end of it. Alexandra walked over and knelt beside her. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Emma looked up and smiled, a real smile, the first one in weeks. "I think so," she whispered. "I keep thinking about what you said. That strength is not silence. That strength is showing up even when you are breaking." Alexandra took her hand gently. "Your mother gave you that strength, and tonight you are going to share it with the world." Emma nodded, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling. Tonight is for her. The lights in the theater dimmed. The audience fell silent, and the performance began. The first 6 scenes unfolded beautifully, each one more powerful than the last. The actors poured their hearts into every word, every gesture, every breath. The audience sat captivated, tissues pressed to their eyes, hearts open and vulnerable. And then came scene 7. The stage went dark. A single spotlight appeared, falling gently upon Alexandra. She stood alone, her head bowed, her hands clasped in front of her. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the theater. "I have been so afraid," she said, "afraid that if I stop hurting, I will stop remembering, that the grief is all I have left of him." From the shadows, Keanu stepped into the light. His hand found her shoulder, warm and steady. "Grief is not the price of love," he said. "It is the proof of it, But we are allowed to live too. We are allowed to carry them with us, not as weight, but as wings. The audience was silent, breathless. Tears flowed freely down countless faces. Then the lights shifted, warm and golden, the color of sunflowers. And Emma's voice filled the theater. "Dear Mom," she said, her words trembling but clear, "I thought I could not survive without you. I thought the pain would swallow me whole, but you taught me something I almost forgot. The light does not disappear when the sun sets. It just finds new ways to shine. You are my sunflower, and I will keep turning toward the light. For you, for me, for us." The final words faded into silence. No one moved, no one breathed. Then the applause began. It started slowly, a few hands clapping in the darkness, then more and more, until the entire theater was on its feet, applauding with a force that shook the chandeliers. People were crying openly, holding each other, strangers embracing strangers. Something had happened in that room that went beyond entertainment. Something had healed. Backstage, Emma stood frozen in the wings, tears streaming down her face. Alexandra reached her first, pulling her into a long embrace. "You did it," Alexandra whispered. "You honored her." Keanu joined them, his hand resting gently on Emma's back. "Your mother would be proud. I know I did not know her. But I know you, and that tells me everything I need to know about the woman who raised you." Emma laughed through her tears, a sound so pure and unexpected that it made everyone around her smile. Martin approached slowly, his eyes red and swollen. He stopped in front of Emma and took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "not just for how I treated you, but for forgetting why we do this in the first place. We tell stories to heal, to connect, to remind each other that we are not alone. You reminded me of that, and I am grateful." Emma looked at him and nodded. "Thank you for listening, for changing." Martin smiled, a real smile, perhaps the first in years. "Thank you for giving me the chance." The charity event raised over $12 million that night, the largest amount in the foundation's history, but the numbers were not what mattered. 3 months later, Alexandra's newest exhibition opened in Los Angeles. The centerpiece was a massive painting, a woman's silhouette made entirely of sunflowers reaching toward an impossibly bright sky. The title was simple: Grace. Emma stood before it, crying and smiling at the same time. Beside her was Alexandra, and beside Alexandra was Keanu, his arm resting gently around her shoulder. "You painted my mother," Emma breathed. Alexandra shook her head softly. "I painted her light, the light she gave you, the light you shared with all of us." Keanu looked out at the crowd gathered in the gallery, strangers brought together by art and grief and hope. He spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. "The world teaches us that time is money, that schedules are sacred, that efficiency is everything. But I have learned something different. People are everything. Every moment we choose kindness over convenience, we change the world, one soul at a time." He looked at Alexandra, his eyes full of something unspoken. Respect, admiration, love. "Some moments change us," he said, "and some people remind us who we want to be." Alexandra took his hand. Outside, the California sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold. A sunflower sunset. And somewhere, Grace was smiling. This story reminds us that kindness is never wasted. It reminds us that grief does not have to destroy us, it can transform us. It teaches us that the most powerful thing we can do for another person is simply to see them, to pause, to listen, to say, "You matter." Keanu Reeves did not save Emma with grand gestures or heroic actions. He saved her by stopping, by noticing, by refusing to let efficiency become more important than humanity. And in doing so, he reminded everyone in that theater and everyone hearing this story now that we all have the power to change someone's life. Not with fame or money or talent, but with presence, with compassion, with love. May we all find the courage to be sunflowers, to turn toward the light even on the darkest days, and may we never forget that the kindness we offer today becomes the hope someone else carries tomorrow.